At time of writing, it's been about a month since I uploaded my love letter disguised as a defense argument on Castlevania Nocturne, which is currently in copyright jail because Netflix doesn't believe in fair use and YouTube hates creators. And the show hasn't left my mind since, and while I enjoyed all of it, my mind is always inevitably drawn back to just two scenes, both quiet conversations from episode 6. The first is Ulrich's telling Mizrak about how the conquistadors slaughtered his people, and thinking about it inevitably draws my mind to the second scene. I'll play that first scene now to give everyone a refresher on what was said.
Long ago, when I was still human, I watched men wade ashore from ships and slaughter my people. Slaughter them in their thousands, millions in the end. Who could have believed such a thing? They said they were doing it for their god. Sometimes their king too, but always their god. But in the end, there was only her.
In the end, there's only her. I didn't understand what he meant at first. Even while writing the script for the last video, I still hadn't figured it out, though I am admittedly a bit stupid at times. But when I think about it in the context of the second scene, I can finally put the pieces together. In the last video, I said that Erzsébet was colonialism personified, and I stand by that. She is the antithesis to the goals of our heroes, seeking to destroy the revolution and place the people of France in chains of servitude, and then continue it all over again in America and presumably continue doing so to the rest of the world. She offers an attractive lie to her fellow oppressors, that she can restore their so-called natural order and put them where they supposedly belong, on the very top, and by the end of the season, it almost seems like she might be able to. Erzsébet shackles the heavens themselves, pulling the moon into an eternal eclipse, crushing the heroes and even taking and turning Terra, forcing our heroes to flee as the world is locked into darkness. But it's not her that Ulrich was referring to. Not exactly. It's what she represents. The hatred, the lies told by slavers and colonizers and oppressors, the drive of absolute monsters to subjugate, to steal and murder and enslave those they consider beneath them, and claim it's just how the world works.
Watch how we will get them to eat their own vomit here in France. Then you will see how to deal with you American upstarts.
But it doesn't end here. Like I said, my mind keeps being drawn back to another scene, similarly short, but so very important in the grand scheme of the show, and that's communion with Cecile. I didn't talk about Cecile in the last video, and that's something I actually regret, because she is criminally underappreciated. I haven't seen anyone really talking about her online, and that's a shame because although she plays a relatively minor role in the season, her impact cannot be understated. She acted as Annette's teacher and guide, and she brought the slaves of Saint-Domingue together, and it's her guidance that gives Annette hope when she feels lost. I'll play the scene now, so try and see if you can figure out why it connects so strongly for me.
You killed Vaublanc. We all rejoiced.
But I lost Edouard.
Though not his soul. Take courage from that.
The Belmont boy turned out to be useless as fuck. He literally ran away. Ran away.
Everyone starts by running away, Annette.
What? That is completely different. How can you possibly compare that? I came here for guidance. I thought I'd seen the worst evil the world could hold. But here, it's been growing roots for centuries. And this vampire messiah, she's older still.
Your power is old too, Annette.
If these are my ancestors, Cecile, they're just a babble. Noise. They're no match for some ancient Egyptian devil god.
They're only a babble because you're not listening. You were shaped, Annette. Everything about you by being born a slave. Of course you were. It's the source of your fury, but it's not the source of your power. They like to tell you, these petty devils like the Comte de Vaublanc, that slavery is just the way of the world. It's what people do. And you can look around and think, oh, maybe they're right. Evil, violence and oppression everywhere. Even these French with their high ideals. What do they know about what we've suffered? And what do they care? They'll build their new world. but it won't be freedom or equality or brotherhood for us.
If they build it at all.
But they know it's not true, Annette. The petty devils. It serves them if we believe it. But humanity didn't enter this world dragging armies of slaves. That came later. And your ancestors. Of course, I mean your mother, who loved you. And your father, who was dragged from her by men with whips. And your grandmother, who watched this ship sail, weeping and pulling her hair. But they go back. Beyond them and beyond them. Back to the source. To the Iwa of Ogun. And a world without slaves or masters. Learn to hear your ancestors. There is light in this darkness.
Cecile serves up a complete refutation of Elizabeth and the B-Simp's beliefs, and the thing is, she's entirely right. I'll come back to her later though, because first, we need to talk about how Nocturne handles its themes of violence and oppression, and how they ultimately refuted in the end by the characters. Also, I think it's important that I disclose that, while I am a member of several different minority groups, I'm also so Caucasian I'm the only blonde in my family, so I can only speak on the subject from an academic and secondhand perspective. I am and will always do my very best to be as accurate and respectful as possible in my videos, but it's important to recognise the limits of my perspective and voice. I urge everyone watching this to seek out information from non-white creators on the subjects presented in this video, as I'm sure to have a bunch of blind spots and their voices are far more important on the subject than my own. Thank you. With all that said, let's begin this discussion on oppression and liberation in Castlevania Nocturne. I think it's important to start with the acknowledgement that oppression has always stemmed from one group's need for control and a sense of superiority over another. It comes in many forms, both personal and systemic, but at its core, that is where it always comes from. And slavery exists as the logical extreme to oppression. When oppressors are given too much power with too little repercussions, slavery is the natural endpoint. And it's horrifying, but that's just how the mindset works. It comes down to slavery or eradication. It's also important to note that, while slavery existed in cultures across the world long before the European slave trade began, it was nowhere near as destructive and prevalent before then. And the massive spike in slave popularity didn't simply stem from the need for labour, it came from the disgusting, intoxicating, malicious joy Europeans gained from being able to force their self-proclaimed supremacy upon the world. That gleeful malevolence is the basis of the oppressive mindset, and it's not hard to see that internal logic when regarding Elizabeth and her B-Simps. One need look no further than Comte de Vaublanc for proof of this. The man is so obsessed with the so-called natural order that he appears to take an almost sexual glee in exerting his power over people, especially people like Annette. I've said before that vampires traditionally represent the parasitism of nobility, and you'd honestly be hard-pressed to find a more fitting example of that than a slave owner, especially one like Vaublanc.
They presented you to me hours after you were born. Tiny, squalling thing. Ugly as a newly hatched chick, with a neck like a wishbone. I should have snapped it then.
Vaublanc serves as the perfect starting point for this discussion, as he also serves as the most blatant depiction of an oppressor in the show. He's uncomplicated, and the mindset of the natural order that the B-Simps share permeates his character on every level. He's the one who introduces the audience to the concept after all, so it's only fair. Vaublanc is a fitting representation of a plantation owner because he's built his entire sense of self on his position as someone who stands above others. In fact, it's because of his rigid belief that certain people stand above others that he worships Elizabeth as much as he does. Make no mistake, Vaublanc isn't an opportunist like the Marquis. He genuinely believes her cause seemingly to the point of blindness, completely incapable of seeing the hypocrisy in the fact that he proudly brands himself as one of her followers, even while attempting to shame and intimidate Annette for her life as a slave. In his imagined natural order, he stands above people like Annette and her mother, and therefore is free to brand them and treat them how he wishes. But by that same token, he must naturally submit to Elizabeth, his goddess, who will fix the world. And what's funny is that Vaublanc, like many oppressors, simply cannot fathom the possibility that he does not stand above those he despises. Even when Annette turns tables on him, caging him and laying judgment upon him in the way he must have for so many of her people, he rages and rants about her time as a slave, desperate to somehow hold himself above her even as the sun begins to rise, obsessed with somehow proving that she's still locked up, still bound as his slave. I think the most interesting thing about this scene is how Vaublanc implies that there is a prophecy of Erzsébet's coming. He says they were told to view things like slave uprisings and disorders as heralds of her coming, as if they represent an imbalance in the world that only a messianic figure can redress. But these things are the natural order. The oppressed will naturally rise up above their oppressors in time, and the unjust are inevitably punished for their transgressions. History is full of such instances. Vaublanc, hell, all of the beast imps are desperately clinging to the illusion of a cosmic rebalancing that will put them squarely on top where they think they belong, and to that end they will believe anything if it confirms that bias. That's why Vaublanc tries so desperately to scare Annette, telling her that she isn't free where it matters, even though he's the one who willingly gave up his own freedom, willingly branding himself as Erzsébet's servant, because the idea that it might not be true, that he might not be intrinsically superior, is too much for him to comprehend.
This is a symbol of loyalty to my mistress.
Erzsébet better.
You're not fit to say her name. How long were you a slave? 15 years? More? Born in chains to a woman in chains. Some people look backwards and forwards and all they see are slaves. You, your people, my property.
There is an inherent sickness in the minds of people like Vaublanc, a need for an other to wage a constant war against to allow them to feel superior to an imagined enemy. And this can make the world feel like a very dark and hostile place. But these people are always outnumbered, and their darkness will always burn away eventually as human kindness lights the way.
This is the natural order.
Carrying on with the subject, let's move on to Erzsébet. I was planning on discussing the abbot before her, but I realised in the middle of writing that it's kind of impossible to separate him from the church. So I'll talk about him when we get to part 2 and just jump right into the vampire messiah herself. Erzsébet is designed to be the personification of colonialism and oppression. Now, some people may find it strange that the creators would use a woman for that representation instead of a man, but there's actually historical precedence for it. See, setting aside the fact that she is a monster, white women have been used in horror movies since the days of the Hays Code to represent innocence, purity, and cultural stability. A kick the dog moment is the name for the trope wherein a bad guy's status is reinforced on screen through the abuse of an innocent creature. Although the trope specifies dogs, it's actually more common for the victim to be a woman, and in horror action movies, these moments tend to be used to really hammer home just how horrible the monster or villain is. Think back to the most popular mainstream horror or action movies you've seen. How many times was the often incredibly violent death of a woman used to suddenly raise the stakes and make you really sit up and recognize the threat of the monster? This trope plays on the audience's sympathy because we're trained to expect and even accept violence against masculine figures, while cringing at the mere thought of violence against the feminine, unless that femininity is displayed in a man, but that's a discussion for a different day. All kinds of media use violence against the feminine as a visual shorthand for monstrousness, and while it didn't start with horror, horror and action are where you most often see it, and I say all of this to give important context to what I have to say next. The Birth of a Nation depicts a man in blackface sexually assaulting a white woman and then shows the, and I use this word with the biggest fucking quotation marks you can imagine, heroic KKK tracking him down and lynching him. It is a white supremacist propaganda film that uses the language of horror cinema to lionize racism, and Erzsébet uses similar tactics to bring people to her side. Erzsébet uses the symbolism of purity and whiteness to attract people. She is depicted as a Joan of Arc figure, a holy maiden come to save France from the horrors of the revolution. Consider her first on-screen appearance. She swathes herself in holy imagery, in gold and silk and silver. She rides a golden chariot pulled by pure white horses. She looks the part of a traditional savior figure, true, but is nothing but an illusion. She uses her status as a white woman to project an image of goodness that people can grasp onto, and in doing so she wields her white femininity as a weapon. This is why she's the face of oppression and colonialism, because she is the excuse used to justify the horror. It's actually somewhat disturbing when the people finally greet her. The crowd is a mix of humans and vampires, all united under their love for her, despite the fact that they should be mortal enemies. Because of her appearance, because of the story projected by her image, the humans in the crowd are more than happy to cheer for a literal monster, because all they see is someone who can give them what they want and not someone who will take everything away from them. She believes she deserves it as well, their adoration I mean. She openly states that her beauty is what will win people over, that she is a god and therefore the abbot will worship her. and despite the projection of benevolence, her ideals are anything but. She derives pleasure from breaking people, from making them suffer and destroying them bit by bit. And what's more, she claims what she steals as originally her own. When she transforms in episode 8, Elizabeth says that she is Sekhmet. She talks about sacrifices and worship as if they've always belonged to her and always been dedicated to her, as if she herself were there when the gods first walked the earth, but she fucking wasn't. She has simply stolen from other people and claimed it to be rightfully hers. Elizabeth is a disgusting demon that speaks for a revolting subset of people with a repulsive mindset, that they are entitled to everything and everyone. She is truly unrepentantly evil, and I genuinely hope we learn more about her in the coming seasons, because I'd really like her characterization to at least somewhat complement her thematic importance. We've only gotten a small glimpse of it, but I have complete confidence that the writers won't let us down.
The skies will break into obsidian black, and my glory will cover the earth. And yes, she was once the humble girl whose I called mad. But see, she was the Messiah the whole time. And now she has the blood of Sekhmet in her veins. All will see and all will bow. She stands here not only as your queen, but as your god.
From a thematic standpoint, it's hard to stress just how important Edouard is to the story of Nocturne. Though he was born free, he spent his adult life assisting escaped slaves and aiding in the revolution, and in his death he continued to undermine the authority of oppressors, and most of it is done through music. Music is a powerful tool, and it's been used throughout history as a rallying point. Revolutionary songs were used to bolster courage and remind the singer what they were fighting for. Slaves would sing not just because it made work more bearable, but because it would help them to connect to one another in a way that the physical distance enforced by their tormentors prevented, and because it helped them feel connected to their culture, which they could draw strength from. And because of this, historically, tyrants have always sought to destroy art and silence music. Tyrants are a fearful lot. For all their talk, their biggest fear will always be the people they consider beneath them. This is why they work so hard to crush hope wherever they can find it, and we see this behaviour from both Vaublanc and Elizabeth. Vaublanc murders Annette's mother after finding symbols carved into various parts of their hut, and it's rather telling what he says to her next.
There will be no spells cast on my plantation. No charms, no dances, no songs.
Vaublanc equates spells and charms with song and dance, and he's not entirely wrong in that regard. Though Esther may not have been casting anything, song and dance have long been parts of rituals in paganism. Hell, they're technically part of the ritual of the church, if you've ever seen gospel singers. But whether or not they have supernatural power isn't the point of the scene, it's a symbolic power they have. Esther's song is of freedom, a promise that their souls, their Iwa, remain unchained. It's a reminder that, despite everything the masters can do to them, they can never have full control, and the song ends up being almost prophetic. Annette's power comes from the Iwa of Ogun, the Yoruba god of iron and war, and through the connection to her heritage that is intrinsic to her soul, she manifests the power to shatter their bindings. Through that connection, she is liberated. Edouard doesn't have that same connection to his heritage, with the most information we gain being that he's of mixed ancestry. But then, Edouard's tale isn't about connecting to his ancestors, it's about connecting to other people. Edouard's power is less physical than Annette's, but no less dangerous to the B-Simps. Edouard is able to connect with other people through his singing, and this makes him a threat even Elizabeth cannot ignore. When he was human, he would use this to curry favour with those in power, to charm them into dropping their guard and giving him information he could use to aid the oppressed. But as a night creature, I believe his power might have become more literal. After all, it's only after he sings that the former Jacques is able to remember and think for himself. We've yet to find out what happened to Edouard after Elizabeth ordered him silenced, but I very much doubt it'll be the last trouble he causes her. As I've said before, he plays a role of saboteur, undermining the villains from the inside, and what's funny is, even though Elizabeth recognises the threat he presents, the Abbot doesn't. And the Abbot has the most to fear from sabotage, as he's in the most precarious position of all. Alright, y'all know who's coming, let's talk about the church. Regardless of anyone's personal feelings on the subject, it is a fact that, historically, organised religion has been used as a tool of oppression, with faith as the excuse. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Whether it's been due to differences in sexuality, race, gender or social class, God has been the excuse used for some of the worst crimes ever committed. But I want to stress that this in no way makes faith or religion as a concept bad, nor am I arguing that believing in God makes you a bad person. Are we clear? Okay then, back to the dickhead. As I said in my historical breakdown in the last video, the clergy were not the good guys during the French Revolution. They conspired with the Second Estate to halt political progress and acted as a second form of taxation, bleeding the peasantry dry and bankrolling the nobility. and because of this, they had a vested interest in stopping the revolution, which is well reflected in the Abbot's actions. The Abbot spends the entirety of the season calling the revolution evil and claiming that what they do is nothing short of barbarism. He believes the revolution threatens the church, which, to be fair, it does, and will do anything he can to quash it, even if it means casting aside the morality of his faith to do so, steeping himself in non-stop corruption. I will be blunt. In Nocturne, forge mastery is a supernatural equivalent of slavery. While you could probably formulate an argument as to it being the same in the original, I'd argue that forge mastery in the first Castlevania is thematically different, given the extensive exploration of Isaac and Hector and their relationship to the craft. In Nocturne though, the same nuance cannot be found, and I feel like this was a good decision on the writer's part, because it fits the themes much better. Because in a show so dedicated to exploring a discussion of slavery and the natural order, the priest making a deal with a demon to create a literal hell machine to supply a dark god with an army of murdered innocents transformed into demons is a pretty damn good addition. Side note, I saw someone on Reddit complaining that the monster designs sucked because they didn't relate to the games at all, but come on dude, he's not a real forge master and they're artificial night creatures. It's visual storytelling at its finest. Back on topic though, I think it's important that the Abbot's church acts as the centerpiece for the main scenes of conflict in the show so far, because the Abbot actually acts as the central villain of the season. Erzsébet is the big bad, yes, but the Abbot is the one with a real story presence. She may have swallowed the moon, but he's the one who throws his people to the wolves, because here's the thing, the Abbot's personal conflict came down to either preserving the sanctity and ideals of Christ's teachings, or preserving the ecclesiastic authority that the church has over the people, and he chose the second one. This is why understanding the historical context of the setting is important, since this is the choice that the clergy made during the years leading up to the revolution, and everything we see the Abbot do stays in line with that crime. What I said in the last video remains as true as ever. In fact, I'm just going to replay that part to save myself a little bit of time here. If you look at his actions, it's blatantly fucking obvious that all the Abbot cares about is the church, not the god he claims to love. He claims blasphemy upon blasphemy when the heroes stand against him, but it's all projection. He's the one consorting with demons and vampires to quote-unquote protect God. He's the one taking the bodies of innocent people murdered by monsters and turning them into soldiers. And Maria's pleas to the father that loved her and her mother enough to protect them from the bully boys and hide her witchcraft fall on deaf ears because he loves the church far more, and he uses the story of Abraham as an excuse to throw them both to the proverbial wolves. There is no excuse he will not make and no atrocity he will not commit. It doesn't matter what sin he commits or how harmful the vampires and their plans are to all of humanity, or even that he's supporting an actually blasphemous, self-proclaimed god with his actions, because what he does is in the name of the authority of the church, which he will claim to be in the name of God, and in his mind, he will be a martyr to his faith. This is why it's important to recognise the church as a tool of oppression, because in both the show and in real life, it's been wielded as one. The Abbot uses his position to spread falsehoods, the basement to hold his hell machine and his demon slaves, and still he questions why things have only gotten worse, and all you have to do to translate it to reality is to trade out Erzsébet for the Second Estate, wherein the church spent years both permitting and assisting in the aristocracy's flagrant abuse of the people, and then wondered why they were being led to the guillotine alongside the monsters they spent so long subverting. This is also why, thematically, Edouard had to die and be reborn as a night creature, because as a human, perfect as he was to the role, he could do nothing to disrupt the villain's plans, but as a night creature, newly enslaved and yet already breaking through his shackles, he can now aid the heroes from the inside. I predict the Abbot will ultimately be killed by his own creations, mirroring the way Annette killed Vaublanc and setting up the final confrontation as the church and the literal tool of oppression that is the Night Creature Factory are taken out of the picture. That's my theory at the very least. I think Cecile's conversation with Annette is one of the most important parts of the entire show, because it brings a perspective rarely talked about in media. Annette says she thought she'd seen the worst evil the world had to offer in Vaublanc, but it couldn't hold a candle to what she found in Europe, to the deeply disturbing malice that's been growing for centuries, and to the cruel insanity of the Blood Countess. And she's right, as horrifying as the treatment of the slaves was in Haiti, and it was awful by all means, no questions asked. Please do not think in any way that I am attempting to minimize their suffering. It was still only one part of it. One tendril of colonial influence stretched out from its source across the sea, and it must make her feel so small, so helpless in the face of such an ancient evil. But Cecile's response is perfect, because it addresses it all, and it reminds both Annette and the audience of the truth. The destruction of cultural identity is a foundational piece of colonialism and enslavement because it allows the oppressor to rewrite the narrative. And yes, Cecile is refuting the idea of their so-called natural order, But there's a deeper layer to it, because the ultimate goal of colonialism isn't just to conquer, but to make its victims believe there's no other way for things to be. Humans venerate age when it comes to philosophies, and we call these legacies, these lasting ideals. The older an idea is, the more people are naturally drawn to the conclusion that it must be true, because how could something have stuck around for so long without being right? And this is the trap Annette is falling into, equating the age of these oppressive practices with power. And like Cecile says, of course she is. She was shaped by her upbringing, just as everyone else is. And the abuse, the horrors she's witnessed and been forced through, they've left their scars upon her. And just as Cecile says, you can look around and think that it might be true, but it's not. And people like the B-Simps, they know it's not. And they can beat you, they can lie and murder and enslave and try to rewrite the narrative to suit their needs. But in the end, it only works if you believe them. And thanks to her mentor, Annette is saved from falling into that terrible mindset. Because what she has is just as old, if not older, than anything the B-Simps or Erzsébet have. And just as the vampires have a god on their side, so too do our heroes. Colonialism might be old, and the ideas behind it might be older still, but the legacy of Annette's ancestors is just as ancient. From her family to her homeland, to the very origin of her people, all the way back to a divinity all their own, there is wisdom and power that will forever refute and combat the ideals of oppression. The petty devils want nothing less than to rewrite reality, to force everyone to see the world the way they want, and that's why they seek to destroy heritage, to silence song and still dance and crush any and all connections to their victims' cultures, because only in doing that can they crush any semblance of hope. But no matter how hard they try, their natural order will never come to be, and the people will never stop fighting them, because humanity didn't come into this world dragging armies of slaves, and there's nothing natural about ruling over others through oppression and hatred, and so people will always fight against it. The petty devils may spread their lies, they may cling to their falsehoods and try to force you to do the same, and they may strive to drag people into the darkness, but the sun will always rise again to dispel it. And even a dark god cannot snuff out the light of hope, because evil only wins when good people give in and allow it to thrive unabated. And even when all hope seems lost and you have nothing left to give, someone will always step up to stand by you, because regardless of what the monsters might think, despite our flaws and missteps and our capacity for great evil, humans are inherently hopeful creatures, and where there's hope, there will always be strength to stand again and fight another day. Whether it comes down to race or gender or sexuality, we will always rise again to take back our freedom to be. I think Annette will be the key to combating Erzsébet. I think that, as the show continues, she'll learn to hear the voices of her ancestors, and her connection to Ogun will allow her to defy the power of Sekhmet. Erzsébet is currently untouchable, but that's only because of what she represents, and the power she stole. And I believe the power bequeathed to Annette will trump the pilfered divinity of the false messiah, because Annette is here to break the chains of oppression, wherever they may come from, and no cat-faced albino bint with delusions of grandeur is going to get in her way. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry it took so long to get another video out. I had a depressive episode like you wouldn't believe, and it took everything I had to just get up in the morning for a while. I really hope you liked it, and I'll be back with a less serious video sometime soon, hopefully before the end of the year. Take care of yourselves, and I hope you're all doing well, wherever and whenever you are. Bye.